Welcome back to Midrash Agnon, here live from the Agnon house in Jerusalem, and brought to you online, folks all over the world on Web Yeshiva. We have folks, I'm just looking quickly, in New York, in Poland, which is of course appropriate for this story. We have a student, there is a Web Yeshiva student that joins us from Turkey. I don't know if he's online tonight. And of course, here in Yerushalayim, we have people in Tel Aviv. I'm not sure about Yaffo. We have a lot of work to do tonight, folks. So, because we have to get these pilgrims that we've been following. We have to get this group of pilgrims that we've been following from Buczacz. They've already left Buczacz. They're in some other town in Galicia. And they have to get from Buczacz at least to Constantinople. Here's a picture of Constantinople in the 19th century, probably a little after they were there, but probably looked more or less the same when the ship came sailing into port. And we'd like to get them, if possible, tonight, all the way to Yerushalayim. Here's a picture of the Kotel, which features so prominently in the closing scenes of the story, as it looked in the I think this picture is from the 1860s or something like that. Probably not too much long after they were there. Quick recap, just by a quick show of hands, who's read the whole story by this point? Okay. Great. People are raising their hands. So quick recap of what we did last week. The story starts off probably set 1835, 1840, something thereabouts. A group of Bilvav, a term that Agnon coins, hardy folks, good men, good souls, are going up. They and some women folk, their wives, their daughters, some other single ladies, about 17 people or so, have committed themselves to make the journey from Buczacz, which is of course Agnon's own ancestral home in Galicia. Galicia again is this crossroads. It's politically part of the Austrian Empire. It's culturally part of southern Poland. Today, where we're talking about is part of the western Ukraine. Ukraine, of course, didn't exist as a political entity at that time. They're going up on Aliya. Somebody who's not familiar with the Hebrew, somebody who can't read the Hebrew, asked me a question at some point during the week about this term, going up. Why are they going up to Israel? Well, that's just a Hebraism. In Hebrew, we are always ole Yerushalayim. We go up, literally. Now, there's an idea in the midrash, a midrashic idea that literally stated that the land of Israel is at a higher elevation than the rest of the world, and Jerusalem higher still, and the old city above that, and the Temple Mount above that, and the temple itself is literally the Mount Everest of the world. Now, obviously, the rabbis didn't think that literally, because they could look standing on the Temple Mount, look around, and you see it's not the tallest thing. They're not speaking physically, they're speaking metaphysically. When we say we're going up to Jerusalem, it's not although Jerusalem itself, if you're coming to Jerusalem from any of the nearby surrounding areas, it is in elevation. The route that the Bilvav take as they're going from Yaffo is an uphill climb when you get from past what today is Buczacz, past Motza, going up to Givat Shaul into Yale City. It is a climb, but we're speaking metaphysically. You go up, one goes up in Ole. Somebody makes Aliya, the national airline, El Al, to up. Literally means to go up, both because the plane takes off, or at least we hope it does, and it's not a strike, but also because you go up to the Holy Land. So this group is setting out. They encounter this mystical character, this mysterious character, Hananiah, who had always been searching for Israel, had always been searching for a way to get to Eretz Yisrael, wasn't sure how to get there. Began to even question, is it a real place in this world? or is it a mystical idea of the celestial realm, of the world to come? He has all types of adventures and misadventures on his way, but long story short, he takes up with a group of brigands, a group of highwaymen. Captain of the highwaymen, captain of the thieves, is putting on tefillin, which is a little strange because, well, he's like a pirate, but he's not even Jewish. But he puts on the tefillin because the previous pirate king, the previous bandit king, he was Jewish, but he met a bad end at the end of a noose, as highwaymen sometimes do, as thieves sometimes do. The new thief captain, he takes the tefillin because he takes that as a sign. Hanania falls into some trouble of his own. He's captured by some hoodlums who strip him of all of his worldly goods, leaving him only a mitpachat, a kerchief, which probably looks more or less something like this. Although I see on this one it's stamped "Made in China." I'm sure that Hanania's was not made in China. He finds out that this group from Buczacz are planning to go on Aliya, and he signs up to go along with them. He proves himself to be a very, very valuable resource, a very handy fellow, and they set off on the way to Agnon. At the very end of the story says, or the narrator, I shouldn't say Agnon, the narrator of the story says, the end of the story, which we kind of peeked ahead at the beginning of last week, he points out the story is taking place on two levels. You might read it as a fable or as an agadah, as a type of fairy tale, or you might read it and gain some benefit from it. We're going to come back to that, but we established this idea through the tool of my, I thought, very good joke at the beginning. You can go back to the recording if you didn't catch it. That the story itself takes place on two planes. If we were to take a scalpel and separate the two tales, the tale of Hanania and the tale of the rest of the group, Hanania's tale would read like a fairy tale. The rest of the group would read like a very, very realistic travelogue of 19th century pilgrims to the Holy Land. And Agnon has woven them together in such a way that it not only can be read, it has to be read on both planes. Just one other introductory point before we roll up our sleeves and try to make our way through as much of the story as we can today, so that next week in our final and third session, we'll have an opportunity to really talk about and explore the larger themes of what Agnon is doing with this story, and try to look across some of his other stories to see how he was riffing off of his own ideas and trying to build and make a statement about Eretz Yisrael, the land of Israel, about modern Zionism. I'm trying to figure out very quickly what's wrong with the. One more second, please. Okay, how's that? I hope that's better. Can you hear me? Okay, good. Okay. Just one further idea. I mentioned last time that the origins of the story, a very short fragment from the 1920s, was presented in a letter book to the great Jewish philosopher Franz Rosenzweig, who was dying in the late 1920s of Lou Gehrig's disease, and friends from Europe and Israel sent in letters or essays or all different types of things that were gathered together in a book. The book itself was never published. It was actually lost. It's an interesting story. It was only rediscovered in the 1980s. Agnon's contribution to the volume was an 11-line fragment of what becomes this story. At the National Library this week, I saw a facsimile of it. It was later republished more or less in the form that we have. It, in 1934, in a volume. Sorry, pardon me, please. Just bear with me. Okay. Is that better? Okay. I'm very sorry. In 1934, it's published in a volume in honor of Chaim Nachman Bialik. You heard my kid singing Bialik songs. Bialik's a great national poet of the revival of the Hebrew language. In the original fragment, there's no Hananya. We'll hopefully get up to the paragraph that constitutes the original kernel of the story. It's the kernel of the story of the Bilvav, of the pilgrim, on the boat. When the story gets expanded and published in its final form, he's added this element of the mysterious Hananya. So last week I suggested that Hananya, Agnon used to like these midrashic shemot, to like the name of the character usually is a reflection of something about the character. So I suggested Hananya, the biblical Hananya, in the book of Daniel. But last night, very late at night, a late night cup of coffee kept me up very late. It struck me. Hananya makes his appearance in a volume for Bialik. Bialik's name, Chaim Nachman, he was often known as Het Nun Bialik. Chaim Bialik. Chaim meaning charm. Hananya, charming, charmed by God. Is it possible the name Hananya is a reference to Agnon himself? No one suggested this. It's to Bialik himself. Is it possible? It's possible. If it was, obviously we have no idea. It's pure speculation on my part. But if that's the case, it would have been a typical Agnonian little fetch on the name. And if that's the case, then we have to ask, in what way is there a connection between Bialik and our Hananya from the story? We'll have to come back to that. Okay, here we go. I'm on page 42 in the story, and we're going to skip around a lot. They're making their way down towards the Black Sea. From the Black Sea, they'll take a boat. At a certain point, they're going to take a little boat on the Danube River to get to the Black Sea port. From there, they're going to take another boat to Constantinople. And from Constantinople, an even larger ship that will take them hopefully to Eretz Yisrael. Along the way, they're in a town called Putin or Chotin or Chotin, depending upon which language you're speaking. I'm here on page 43. And there's a discussion of the antiquity of the place, which reminds us of something that Agnon writes in the introduction to a collection of his stories called Sikurei Polim. Agnon has an agadah of how the Jews originally got to Poland, a fable of how the Jews originally got to Poland, that the Jewish settlement in Poland was very ancient. When they got there, it was kind of divinely foreordained. A heavenly voice comes out, or a note falls from heaven that says, until it's time to go back to Eretz Yisrael, Poland, here you'll dwell. A play, I mean, it's a play on words. It's not the real etymology, of course, but Poland in Jewish folk etymology means a place to dwell in the meantime until we go back to Eretz Israel. And the myth that they get there and growing on the trees of the forests of Poland are the Mesechtot Ashat, are the volumes of the Talmud themselves growing up out of the forest. But the Talmud itself is growing on the trees of Poland. And in fact, Poland was although it ended really badly, but for 1,000 years, it was a very rich and vibrant, perhaps among the most rich and vibrant Jewish communities in history. And this idea here that they get to chosen them is this tradition that they found these old coins, these old Hashmonaim coins, with the names of Jerusalem. Furthermore, living there were many women in this town. This town's a kind of crossroads between Christian Europe and Muslim, the Ottoman Empire to the southeast. There were many women who did not know what had befallen their husbands, but there was no authority to deliver them from their fate, and they could not marry again. The husbands of some of them had gone to do business in Europe or Turkey and had not come back, because this place was a kind of crossroads. People were often traveling, and in those days the travel was very dangerous. And, what would happen to the husband? He'd get lost. He wouldn't come back. The husbands of others had been slain on the way, and their burial place was unknown. One of these, here's the problem with the translation, secluded women. Of course, secluded here in the English, in the Hebrew, is aguna. In aguna, of course, well, that's actually the idea that in aguna, a woman who can't obtain a divorce is she's anchored to her husband. That's also a folk etymology. It's apparently not the real proper etymology of. No, they're just homonyms. But apparently it's not. Although everybody likes to use that etymology, and it works. So let's say it: a woman who's anchored to her husband in the absence of a divorce. In contemporary language, we speak about agunot, about a woman who has a recalcitrant husband, a nasty fellow who won't give his woman a Jewish divorce, so he has her stuck over a barrel. That's not the classic. That's not a classic aguna. In Talmudic language, in halachic language, in rabbinic language, an aguna is a woman whose husband has disappeared, lost at sea, went off on business, never turned up again. It was probably much more common in the old days than it is today. So because of the nature of this community, there were a lot of these types of women. There were a lot of types of women who were stuck. So one of these secluded women, one of these agunot women, joined our comrades to make the journey with them. This was her sad story. Formerly, she had dwelt with her husband and had borne him sons and daughters, never hearing a harsh word from his lips. His business had been dealing in horses, which he bought for the Nobel. He was a horse trader. But horse trading is very similar to a different profession, namely horse stealing. So apparently this fellow, although to his wife he was an upright businessman, apparently he had some other shady past. And of course this fellow, this Zusha is his name, the horse stealer, disappeared. The woman is in aguna. She's stuck, and we of course know who's this Zusha. He's I said pirate. He's not really a pirate. He's the chief robber that Hananiah knows met his end at the end of a noose. Well, this is going to become significant. They start talking. In the town, there's some discussion. There was an old judge who was present here on page 45. And he said if he's referring to that Jewish robber chief who was hanged in the land of Ukraine, I can promise they'll not find him anymore. Meaning we don't expect him to come home one day because he's long gone. So this woman, who's a little alarmed to find out that that there's this rumor that her otherwise upstanding husband is rumored to have been, maybe he's this this robber. So there's no eyewitness testimony. It's all hearsay. Hananiah met a robber who said that he knew a Jew who was a horse thief, who had been the previous robber chief, who got hung. So Hananiah, the wheels start moving. That maybe there's a way to free this aguna, this trapped wife. Now, here we have to add a parenthesis. Agnon, of course, his name wasn't Agnon. Agnon's birth name was Shmuel Yosef Tchotchkes. Right? Speaking of tchotchkes, they're selling some now here. I told them that they, here at the Beit Agnon, they started making these little tchotchkes like coasters and magnets and all those kinds of. They don't have any dish towels, but they have other tchotchkes here. So I thought that'd be great if it was a bigger establishment here and we had like a museum store. They should call the museum store tchotchkes. Right? So his name was Tchotchkes. When he came to Eretz Yisrael in 1907, and he starts writing, he publishes his first story, which was called Agunot, although it had nothing to do with Agunot. Well, it did a little bit have something to do with Agunot. He publishes it under the name Agnon, a play on the word Agunot, and that actually, and that becomes his pen name, and ultimately becomes his real name, as was the fashion in those days for people to Hebraize their names when they came on Aliya, when they came to Eretz Yisrael. But usually when Agnon is talking about Agunot, he's not talking about Agunot. This is a classic case of Agunah. Very often, the Agunot that he's talking about, the love stories he's talking about, are stories where the wife isn't trapped, but something goes wrong in the romance, and the man and woman, the boy and girl, they can't get it together. So it's kind of like an unconsummated love, a trapped love, but the opposite. In the opposite, if anybody's read the story, A Simple Story, before Pashut, one of Agnon's great novels with a wonderful translation. That's a story of a man and a woman who, for whatever social reasons, can't marry, and in the next generation, their children either get together or don't get together. I won't ruin the ending of that story. That's a typical Agnonian love story. In Agnon, the love stories are very often unhappy. They're very often unfulfilled love. That's the type of Agnon. Here, it's a classical case of Agunah. So this woman, she doesn't know what to do. She goes to a Rebbe, this Rebbe mayor of Primshel, who tells her, if you wish to weep, go to the place where the sea and the Danube weep for each other and weep there. That's where the Danube River meets the Black Sea. That's where the Danube River, we have a map. Where's the map? Here's the map. Here. Here's the map. Here. Again, here they start off in Buczacz. They're making their way down to Galat. From Galat, they take a boat on the Danube River to the Vilkov on the Black Sea. From there, they'll go to Istanbul, and from there to Eretz Yisrael. Here in this town called Vilkov, this port town. The women sat kneading. The poor woman, this poor Aguna. So they're going along. They're in the wagons. This Aguna has hitched a ride at least as far as the Black Sea. And the wagoner, the first wagoner, tells Hananiah, who's driving the other wagon, "What do you think? You think maybe this is?" And Hananiah says, "It's my opinion that this pharaoh could have been nobody but Zusha." So he realizes 2 + 3 = 4. This woman is the wife of the robber chief who got, and he takes his kerchief and he ties a knot in it as a reminder that he's got a task to do. We've seen him do this before, and he needs to remember to do something. He ties a little knot in the end of his kerchief, that it's got something to do in general. In general, Hanani is interested in tikkun, in fixing things, in repairing things. They go on their way. They pass through a town called Yat in Romania. We saw Yat in. It's interesting. It's a place that Agnon himself never was. Agnon was this path I mentioned last week. The Agnon was actually never in any of these places. He was never in Romania. He was never in Constantinople. When he came back and forth to Israel, it was always through a different path. But Yas, of course, is the home of, who remembers from what we learned before Rosh Hashanah and Kippur, of the great, rapacious Chazan Chemdat, who spent the whole day Erev Yom Kippur doing nothing but eating. So I don't know what Agnon had. Maybe there was a folk tradition about Yas, about the Yassi, that they were all, each and every one of them was a Hazir, each of them was a pig. They ate a lot. He has to throw it in, that in Yas, there were some for whom eating Oznei Haman at Purim, eating Homentashen at Purim was more important than eating matzah on Pesach. Right? He can't help himself. He has to throw in this kind of line. They go along. They get to Galat, from where they take a river boat that's going to take them down to the Black Sea. From there, they'll get to Constantinople. Along the way, in each and every town, they make this point that wherever they go, the Bilvav were greeted with great affection. Jew and Gentile alike come to kiss their feet. These holy pilgrims that are going up to the Holy Land. It's an interesting question as we move along. Besides these bad guys that beat up on poor Hananiah and rob him and take his clothing and leaving him only with a kerchief, which is a necessary plot device in the story, the portrait of all the non-Jews that we meet in the story, I think almost without exception, is really quite sympathetic. Now, Agnon was able to be as satirical about non-Jews as he was about Jews. But here he's really quite sympathetic. If this was a graduate seminar or even a high school class, I might ask you to, write a paper on, the portrayal of non-Jews in this novella. But as you go along reading, ask yourself, why is that? Why is he painting the non-Jews in such a sympathetic light? Chapter 7. They sail along down the Danube. Down the Danube, and then they want to get onto a bigger ship. They're sitting on the boat here on page 54. They sit on their boxes, ate their meal in the moonlight. Suddenly, they're attacked, pounced upon by every kind of mosquito, big as frogs, which bite them, which bit them so that their faces swelled up. It's terrible. So they're suffering. What's the answer to the suffering? What? Eat. No, that's a good guess, Agnon. Not in this case. This is a proper place to mention Rabbi Shmuel Yosef, the son of Rabbi Shalom Mordechai Alevi, who again is a character which the author, Shai Agnon, the actual real life flesh and blood person who sat writing the story in this very house, retrojects, that's the opposite of project because we're going back in time, a character who has his own name as one of these pilgrims. Now, this collection of pilgrims, these 10 men and 7 women, it's like a caper movie. There's like one of each type, like one of each person. Like think of the 7 dwarves, right? Each one has a distinct personality. So there's a Shlomo the Kohen, and there's the businessman, and there's the Shochet, and there's the Gabbai, and there's the Sofer, and there's the Malamed rather, and etc. And the role that this Shmuel Yosef ben Shalom Mordechai Halevi, he's the Misaper Sipurim. Well, of course, Agnon is going to insert himself or a kind of doppelganger of himself into the story, he's going to be a misaper sipurim, and not just any sipurim, he's not just going to be any teller of tales, weaver of fables. He's going to be one that tells the stories of the land of Israel and of Jerusalem. And throughout the story, this Shmuel Yosef tells tales to the other pilgrims to give them encouragement on the way about the special qualities of the land that they are going up to. In this case, it's the story of the Sambatyon, this mythical, midrashic notion of this kind of place. We're not sure where it is. Maybe it's over there. Maybe it's over there. It's far away, where the 10 tribes have been taken off. So it was a notion that existed throughout medieval Jewish thought, that there was all the Jews that had been taken away, 10 lost tribes. Well, they weren't gone. They weren't abolished. They're in hiding. They're like someplace on the other side of this river, and they can't get to us. But when the time comes, we have like this whole army in store, ready to come and return us and save the Jewish people. Every night that they were on the sea, Rabbi Shmuel Yosef cheered them with his words and told them tales of salvation and comfort. They get to where they're going, and suddenly there's a change of heart. All the women make up their mind to go back to Egypt, because the thought of making the sea journey, once they see the Black Sea, we're no longer just going down the river. You see the ocean, you see the sea. It's petrifying. And they all screamed and cried for divorces. They went to the town. It's hard to find a rabbi to give them a divorce. And there's this kind of like farcical type of thing, where first they get divorced, and then they regret getting divorced, so they come back and they get remarried to their husband. Rabbi Moshe says to Rabbi Yosef Meir, remember, Rabbi Yosef Meir had divorced his wife because she didn't want to go on Aliya. The Gemara in Buczacz says that if a couple can't agree, one wants to go up to Aliya, come to live in Israel, and the other doesn't, that itself is grounds for divorce. You're giving away the ending, right? But Rabbi Moshe says to Yosef Meir, what a happy fellow you are, Rabbi Yosef Meir, has given your wife her divorce before we started out, so you were spared all this trouble. Rabbi Yosef Meir, he says, well, I don't know. I have nothing against my wife. And of course, Jay points out it's a foreshadowing to the happy ending that they'll have at the end of the book. They heave ho. Here you are on page 59. They set out onto the sea. Now they're really on the journey. Here at the top of page 60, there's this whole tale of how they kind of like an extended wayfarer's prayer, extended tefillat haderech that they engage in. There's a lot of weaving of tehillim, of psalms, in both in the structure of the story as well as descriptions of the kind of prayers they said. Here's a little tehillim. I just borrowed it from upstairs. It's a little tehillim, Agnon, one of Agnon's tehillim. They're published in no date. They've been published here in Palestine. Is there a date? This is the old kind of like tehillim you carry around with you. There's a back. There's this picture of the kotel. That kind of old woodcut. So they probably each of them had like a little tehillim, little book of psalms, and they would recite these tehillim, and they're special tehillim that are to be recited on a sea voyage, particularly those that describe the dangers of the sea. So after they finished reciting the entire psalm, they sat down on their belongings and took their books in hand and read verses from the Chumash, Navi, Tuvim, from the Tanakh. When a man forsakes his home and reaches another place and finds the vessel which he had used at home, how he rejoices, how much pleasure he derives from the vessel. This is far truer of books which are read and studied and engaged in every day. Thus, Rabbi Moshe sits reading, and they bring all these different verses that that reflect the merits of the land of Israel. But when they're done, after all, they're Hasidim after all. What do? They break out into song and dance. And here's this illustration which Shokin got a lot of use out of. They recycled these illustrations I mentioned in lots of other Shokin publications, but it was done for this edition in English. Hoffman, Anne Gollum Hoffman. She's a professor at Fordham in New York. She's one of the leading, English-speaking scholars on Agnon. By nature of things, the leading scholars on Agnon are here in Israel, writing in Hebrew. She's really one of the very creative writers and critics and scholars in Agnon working in America. There's a very lovely book called Exile and Return, which is about Agnon's writings and this theme of exile and return and Zionism in Israel and etc. So she points to this passage, which is in fact this paragraph of them sitting on the boat and taking out their books and reciting the Psalms and learning Torah on the way. That's the fragment from the Rosenzweig volume. That's the original kernel of the story. The original kernel of the story is this vignette of these dozen or so Bilvav pilgrims going up to the Holy Land, sitting there on the boat, reading and studying the Torah. And Hoffman makes this point of the metaphor of reading, of learning, of Torah study, of engagement with the text, as kind of the motor that's running the engine of the boat. Of course, it was a sailboat, but we can imagine that throughout Jewish history, in the absence of the ability to return to Eretz Yisrael, the substitute existed not in physical earth, but where? In our book, in our Batei Midrash, between the lines, and what are all of the verses that they're reading about the merits and the beauty and the value and the holiness of the land of Israel. That's where we kind of stored it, when we couldn't actually have a hold on the actual land. So here they are, they're going back, they're on the boat is sailing, they've left the shore, they've left the dock, and they're reading the books. And this idea that when you read a book, it's like finding a familiar household vessel, like something from home, when you've been driven far away. You know that sense when you're away from home, maybe a little homesick, you're longing, you stick your hand in your pocket, you find something that reminds you of home, or maybe you bump into a landsman, that Jewish cry. You could be anywhere in the world, and you meet someone from the old Altaheim, from the old home. You say, a landsman, right? One of us, one of my folks. So that's also the book. For the Jew in the exile, the book, and the book, of course, is always the Torah, but all of Jewish writing, rabbinic writing, becomes the home in exile. And we're taking that back, and it's as it were the oars, like the idea like in the slave galleys, they're sitting there rowing along, powering the boat. So how are the Bilvav powering the boat? With the book, by reading the Torah, not by rowing the boat, but by turning the page. The book becomes a metaphor, so that any place. She writes, any place outside of the book is a type of exile. So that somebody who distances himself from the book, it's a double form of exile. Page 62. One of the company looks out, and they see a kind of light shining on the sea. brother, he said to one of the comrades, perhaps you know what that is. But he did not know. And so he had asked another of the company, and that one asked another still. Then when they stand up to pray, it's time to daven, suddenly they're lacking a minion. And this is the question I pointed out yesterday. Because Agnon is careful to point out, when he lists their names, that there were actually 10 men, and along comes Hananiah. And when Hananiah comes along, they're so delighted because he'll complete the minion. Now, he never says explicitly there are 10 men plus Hananiah, but if you do the math, if you got 10 fingers, you can count for yourself. I don't have an answer to this question. A few people sent in a few creative ideas during the week, but nothing terribly satisfactory. We'll come back to it after we understand a little bit more about Hananiah. But the long story short, they've left the dock. They said their Tehillim. They learned it's time to daven mincha, and they look around and they realize, oh, Hananiah's missing. He missed the boat. Hananiah, who'd made the journey with them, had vanished. In the morning, he'd gone down to the market to buy his food, but he'd never come back. And they began to beat their heads and wail, "Woe, alas! Is that the way to treat a companion?" Everyone prays separately, without a minute. And they beat their heads against the sides of the ship in order to divert their thoughts. Finally, everyone returned to his own place and sat down as though he were in mourning. Now, throughout the whole journey, until the very last chapter of the book, they're in mourning for their lost colleague, their comrade Hananiah, who didn't make it. And their assumption, of course, being that if he didn't make it onto the boat, he's not making it to Eretz Yisrael, or worse, or that he's not alive. Right? But something terrible befell him, because the Bilvav, and here there's two stories split, and we're only going to come back to what happened to Hananiah at the end of the book. The Bilvav, remember, here Agnon does take the scalpel and separate the two stories. So we are here now in the realm of realism. If the plane leaves without you, like you get to the airport and you realize you forgot your passport. Any this ever happened to anybody? Yeah, my mother-in-law's here, right? So you're not getting on the plane. There's just no way it's happening. And if you miss the plane, obviously you're not going to get there. And that's a very realistic way to look at things, on the assumption that there's one way to go. But if you are open to a more fantastical way of understanding how the world works, there are many ways to get to Eretz Yisrael. Hananiah already hinted at, Agnon always liked to place these kinds of intra-textual connections. Well, we all remember the story of the goat, the fable of the goat, these magic wormholes and caves and passageways and rabbit holes that can magically transport you from one place to another. There might be more than one way to get to Eretz Yisrael. Eretz Yisrael. Here, page 67. The moon sank, the stars went in, the planets went their way. The Holy One, blessed be He, brought forth the dawn and lit up the world. As the dawn grew bright, the travelers saw the likeness of a man on the sea. When you're at sea, things look a little funny. We took a cruise, my wife and I, in June. And, like when you're out there on the boat and there's no land in sight, and you look out, when the light is a little funny, you see all kinds of things. Oh, is that a dolphin maybe? Is it a whale? Who knows what it is? Reflection off the water. They look and they think they see what looks like the likeness of a man floating on the water. They stared and saw that he had a full beard, payas, earlocks on either cheek, and a book in his hand. Now we who've read the story know that this is none other than Hananiah, who is floating not on a magic carpet, but on his kerchief. Now I'm giving away the ending. You were all supposed to have read, so I'm sorry if I'm doing the ending. Right? And there he is. And how is his magic kerchief powered? He's got a book in his hand. He's got a book in his hand. The same book. A kerchief was spread out underneath him, and on it he sat as a man who sits at his ease. No wave of the sea rose to drown him, nor did any sea beast swallow him. What did the Gentiles say when they saw a man sitting on a kerchief and floating in the sea? Now, there are 4 answers that are given to what in the world is this. Now, I mean, we all know that sailors, saw all types of things. They saw, dolphins or seals or sea lions and thought they were mermaids. So you see what looks like a man sitting on a kerchief reading a Chumash, his payas flowing in the winds, floating along. Well, how do you explain it? So there are 4 answers that are given. 2 by the non-Jews on the ship, 2 by the Jews. Well, what did the Gentiles say when they saw the man sitting on a kerchief? Well, Esther points out it's a mirage. Some of them said such things are often seen by seafarers and desert farers. Which I take to mean it's a mirage, which when you're out there you see such things. Such things are often. Others said, whoever he is, he has a curse hanging over him, so that never more can he rest. That is why he wanders from place to place, appearing yesterday on the dry land and today in the sea. Now this, of course, is a hint at what I mentioned last week, the medieval Christian notion of the wandering Jew. The wandering Jew, again, is not a Jewish notion. It's a Christian notion. It comes from Christian Agadah, that while Jesus was on his way to the crucifixion, a Jew taunted him, mocked him. The Jew was cursed, and the curse was that he would have to wander hither and yon, a restless life, and as he goes along, what's a Jew going to do if he's wandering hither and yon? According to Christian fable, he's going to rob and steal and cheat and all those things that do, according to Christian fables. So the second answer is that, well, if you see somebody wandering along in the sea, so that's the wandering Jew. So on that ship were representatives of each of the 70 nations of the world, and each of them was overwhelmed and terrified by this apparition. So the Jews, so Israel stood on one side, and the nations of the world stood on the other, fearful and staring until their eyelashes became scorched by the sun. Then Rabbi Shmuel Yosef and Shalom Mordechai Halevi said, what is this? It's the Shekhinah. It's the divine presence, which is bringing back the people of Israel to their own place. And here you have this idea that, no, obviously that this answer is given by the Shalom Shmuel Yosef character, who again, I emphasize what I said at the end of last week. This is not necessarily Agnon himself speaking. It's a character who happens to have his own name, whose wife has the same name as the man who lives in his house, and his father, and he was a Levi. But even in stories where Agnon is clearly telling you a story, now obviously this is not Agnon, because Agnon didn't live in the 1830s, right? Right. But even in stories where Agnon is telling you that this is what happens to me today, it's not necessarily what happens to him. So this idea that the Shekhinah, the divine presence, returns to the Jewish people, and it flows both ways. That when the Jews return to Israel, the Shekhinah, God himself, can return. And that when God returns, then the people can return. It's a push me, pull me. It's a two-sided coin. Yeah? Right. I'm sorry. What's your name again? As Barry points out, this reminds us of the column, the pillar of fire that guided the Jews in the desert. And then there's the fourth answer, the answer of Rabbi Moshe, who says, "Sod a pasuk in Tehillim, Sod Hashem Li'Yireh." The secrets are secrets. Now, either he's telling Rabbi Shalom Yosef, right? If you know mystically that this is what's happening, this is divine, kabbalistic, spiritual, mystical secret, you shouldn't reveal such things. or maybe he's telling him it's a we don't know. Like, whatever this is, it's a mystery. We don't know what it is. Now, what's interesting here is the narrator's need to give you an explanation. In other words, normally in fantasy or in fable or in fairy tales, there are all types of things which we, the reader or the narrator, takes for granted. And when you're reading that type of literature, you take it for granted. You're reading Little Red Riding Hood. In no version of Little Red Riding Hood is it necessary for the narrator to explain, oh, by the way, here's how you could have a talking wolf. You know, wolves don't actually talk. But within the realm of that fable, wolves talk, and it's perfectly natural, and neither Little Red, nor Grandma, nor the narrator, nor we the reader ask or expect an answer. Wait a second. How could you have a talking wolf? So why don't we do it here? Here in the audience, Gloria? Gladys. Gladys says it's a suspension of disbelief. But there's no suspension of disbelief here. Here we see something mysterious, and we need to know what? No, but not all people don't always want explanation. It's when we're reading, generally when we're reading fantasy literature, we take for granted that there are certain things in fantasy work. When Harry Potter, they never stopped to explain how those brooms fly. It's a given. And once you enter the world of that piece of literature, lahavdil, not to compare Agnon and Harry Potter, but once you enter the realm of Harry Potter, it's a given that brooms fly, and no one and nowhere do they ever have to explain how it works. It's a plot device. Oh, Jay says none of the four suggestions. Is that true? Is it true that none of them are? Well, okay. Maybe is Hanania somehow connected with the Shekhinah, with the divine presence? I don't know. Maybe yes. Maybe no. But the point is that here there's a double standard. It's a fantasy story and a real story. And when we have this fantastical element, we're going to try to find an explanation for it, and it's not resolved. Although of the four of them, of the four answers, which is closest to the truth? None of them really gets it right on the head. None of them say Hanania missed the boat. He had this magic shmata, which could act as a boat. But which of the four is the closest to the truth? No? You know? The last one is the last one is Shah. It's a secret. So I guess that's true, but it's not an explanation. No. The magic flying kerchief. No, but that's not one of the four answers that's presented, Sherry. We know that's what it is. But of the four answers that are given here at the end of chapter 10, or chapter 8 rather, which one is the closest to the truth? It's not a mirage. And a mystery, answer 4 is not really an answer. Right? So either it's the Shekhinah or it's the wandering Jew. Is somebody here wanting to talk? Somebody on their microphone? The answer that's closest to the truth, although not completely, is the second answer of the non-Jew. It's the wandering Jew. But it's not the Christian wandering Jew. Hanania is the classical wandering Jew, but not that of Christian faithful. Agnon is re-Judaizing the notion of the wandering Jew. It is the wandering Jew. Who's the wandering Jew? Well, remember Rabbi Nachman. I told you about Rabbi Nachman of Breslov. Remember Nachman Milman? Right? A lot of the story has a Breslovian underpinning. If you, if you want, you can get the Chayei Mohoran, the biography of Rabbi Nachman that was written by his students, which describes Rabbi Nachman's travels to Eretz Israel. Rabbi Nachman came to Palestine in the end of the 18th century, the same time that Napoleon happened to be in town. And for whatever reasons, felt compelled to return to Europe. You can also get Buber. Martin Buber has in English. There's also in English a collection of the Agnon, of the Rabbi Nachman stories, and there's a chapter where he describes the whole Rabbi Nachman's journey to Palestine, and you can see a lot of the elements that Agnon is echoing off of. Rabbi Nachman is the wandering Jew, not the Christian one, not the medieval Christian wandering Jew. He's a real wandering Jew. As long as the Jew is not in Eretz Yisrael, Kol makom shani holech le'eretz Yisrael. Rabbi Nachman said, wherever I'm going towards Israel. So maybe that's the correct answer. He's the wandering Jew, but not the wandering Jew in the Christian sense. But Agnon has re-Judaized the notion. They go along, there's all types of conversation. They assume that for Hananiah, they don't yet realize, of course, that this is Hananiah. They assume that Hananiah is being punished because maybe he's angry, maybe God is angry at Hananiah, because remember Hananiah, when he was wandering around before he got to Buczacz, he'd forgotten when Yom Kippur was, and by accident he had desecrated Yom Kippur, and because of that he took upon himself to go without shoes and to live a kind of peasant life as an atonement. So that the pilgrims wonder, maybe God is still angry. This is interesting. I'm going to skip it here around page 74, 75, 76. There's this discussion, because Agnon has to fill pages. In other words, it's a long journey, so you have to tell some stories. So when you're on a boat, it wasn't like the cruise like I went on. Who's been on a cruise, right? So what do you do on a cruise? Until the time, what do? They feed you. Well, that wasn't the case with these on this cruise ship that the Bilvav Yamim are on. So they sit around, they're telling stories. And they're telling stories about the temptations that they felt where the Satan tried to tempt them not to go up to Eretz Yisrael, and how they overcame the temptations to remain behind in the gilded galut, the gilded exile. And they're all very realistic. They're not about the wonders and the magic of Eretz Yisrael. They're about the fact that, well, I'd already sold my house, I'd liquidated my assets, there were mitzvot I needed or wanted to do. They're all very practical. They're all very practical. The Satan says, well, it's hard to live in Eretz Yisrael. Rabbi Yehuda Mendel here says on page 76, well, after all, the land of Israel wasn't given to the ministering angels. It's possible to live in Israel. Not everybody there is the holiest ruler. A very realistic, this worldly vision of what the land of Israel is, and since that's the case, so then Taka, maybe we could go there, maybe we could live there, maybe we can make it. And that was our response. Each of them, in his own way, gives his response to the temptations here put into the mouth of Satan of why they should stay behind in Europe and how they could. But they don't. None of them give the answer that Hananiah would have given about the mysteries and the wonder of Eretz. They're all very practical reasons. I'm told that today there are people, largely because of it's a great. I wish I felt it. I wish I felt I was sitting here, the rich Israeli cousin. But hear these discussions that people have in maybe some of the folks online. You think the economy now in America and the cost of private education, of paying for yeshiva tuition, and maybe if you go and health insurance. So we'll move to Israel. You save all that. You save all that. Well, that's Buczacz. All of you that are listening online, if that's your motivation, we will all welcome you here with open arms. But that's the kind of, if this story was taking place in the age of Nefesh B'Nefesh, these are the kinds of answers that the Bilvav are given. Joseph Mayer says here on page 78, he sighs at the end of the conversation, says, "It'd be shameful indeed if all those houses were nothing more than what they seem the eye to be." But still, we're giving very realistic, pragmatic, practical answers to how it is that we're going to be going up to Eretz Yisrael. And he sighs. But it would be a shame if it was all just pragmatism. So there is that echo of the hopeful and mysterious, but that's there only to sharpen the fact that for 3.5 pages, it was all very, very garden variety, very practical, very pragmatic type of discussion about Eretz Yisrael. The ship sails on and on. Here on page 80. Oh, here. Yeah, I'm going to pause just to look at some of these chats. Yeah, Sherry, I think you're right. That, in other words, part of the re-Judaizing of the wandering Jew tale is to neutralize this idea of the curse. The wandering isn't a curse. It's a mission to get to Eretz Yisrael. The ship sails on and on while the Holy One, blessed be He, rolls away the lights of darkness. Every day the sun grows stronger. The sea waves swayed and moved and sparkled with light, and a kerchief floated upon the waves like a ship, Aliya, Bilvav Yamim, like a ship in the heart of the sea. And a man sat on the kerchief his face toward the east. Whenever they looked out to sea, facing them, they could see the light sparkling on the waters, the kerchief floating like a ship in the heart of the sea, and a man sitting on the kerchief with his face turned to the east. Chapter 10, Istanbul. They reached Kushta the Great, Constantinople, Istanbul is the city that was the capital of Turkey. Is Istanbul the capital of Turkey, or is it the biggest city? Ankara is the capital of Turkey. Right. But it's a city that has a lot of different names. In Hebrew it's called Koshta, Konstantina, Constantinople, Istanbul, it's all the same thing. They finally get there. There's this description of the Sephardic community, which these Polish Jews, of course, had never seen anybody like this. They encounter these Jews of a completely different culture. They're in Istanbul. They're waiting for a ship that will take them from Istanbul to Eretz Yisrael. And again, it's an opportunity for Agnon to spin some more tales. And they're waiting while they're in Istanbul. They're hoping that the next ship that'll pull into the port, maybe Hanania will he caught the next ship. Then there's this aside where it says that during those days while they were waiting in Istanbul, that the Shmuel Yosef and Shalom Mordechai Halevi, again this doppelganger for Agnon, he goes to the Batei Midrash and to the libraries, and this is true. This is a real projection of what Agnon would do. Wherever Agnon went in his journeys throughout Europe, here in Israel, different communities here, he always went and would, great bibliophile that he was, and try to absorb as much as he could by sitting in the Batei Midrash or in the places where books were collected in order to fill the reservoirs with being exposed to as much Jewish literature, rabbinic literature, as possible. There's this letter that he writes back to Buczacz where he updates them on we've made it this far, asking maybe you've heard of what happened to Ananya. They set out from Istanbul towards Eretz Yisrael. Here at chapter 11, there's ships that on the sea. Now this is a big ship. There's more than 1,000 people on this large ship that's setting out. 3 weeks passed peacefully. Page 92. 3 weeks passed peacefully. The ship's crew subdued the waters. The Bilvav sit, they're learning. Rabbi Shmuel Yosef and Shalom Mordechai Levi makes the time pass sweetly with those praiseworthy legends about the land of Israel. The Sephardim that are on the boat, they want to know what he's saying. Now, here's something interesting, of course. We are reading it either in Hebrew or in English, but Agnon lets us know that all of the dialogue in the story, in the original dialogue, was of course in Yiddish. They would have been speaking to each other in Yiddish. So the Sephardim are listening. They see he's like lending forth with these tales of the wonders of Jerusalem. They know he's saying something special, but they can't understand, of course, because they don't speak Yiddish. So he relates it to them in the Lashon HaKodesh, in the Holy Tongue, in Ivrit. Ever since the day when the temple was destroyed, there's no day without its fixation. The Holy One, blessed be He, having long sworn that He would not enter the Jerusalem on high until such time as the Jews would enter the Jerusalem below. That idea, going back to the notion of the Shekhinah returning with the Jews and the Jews returning to the Shekhinah, that God can't return to Israel until the Jews return to Israel. So, I don't think that Hananiah is God, or the Shekhinah, or an angel. But if God is waiting for the Jews to return, so he's got to, as it were, piggyback on one Jew. So if Hananiah is floating along on the handkerchief, well, maybe there's room on the handkerchief for the Shekhinah also. Maybe that's the light tasted. Because God's going to go back and, when my parents are here now, so whenever they leave, there's always this joke that like one of the kids is going to stow away in their suitcase. Right? So God's going to stow away in the suitcase of one of the Bilvavim. Whose suitcase is it going to be? It's going to be Hanan. Right? He only has a mitpachat. 3 weeks pass peacefully. Here on page 93, the ship sails along. Smaller. The ship sails along. The sun gives light. Moon. Blah blah blah. The whole sea was covered with foam as a great sea in terms of the sea of foam. Suddenly there's a storm. There arose a great tumult among the people on board the ship, and here, of course, there are echoes of the book of Jonah and the storm. One man raised his hand and cried and said, while another tore his hair, there was no one to subdue the waters, no one to aid the comrade in the hour of distress. Mention must be made of the captain who remained at his post and at the rudder. At that moment, a sailor their prayers achieved. So they're at sea. There's this storm. They're being tossed around. Their prayers achieved half the ship's men, the crew achieved the other half, and the Holy One, blessed be He, in His great mercy, achieved the whole. Within a few moments, the fury of the sea died down, and the waters changed for the better. And the sea burst forth, said Rabbi Shmuel Yosef, son of Shalom Mordechai Levi, and was about to fill the ship. What was I thinking? I was thinking of the story of Rabbi Shelton. And so Mordechai, Shmuel Yosef, the storyteller, Here they are. He tells the story of Reb Shmelke, who was a real person. Reb Shmuel Horowitz, who died in 1778, which is also all of these real life characters that appear in the story has help us like situate it in real historic time. The story of Reb Shmelke, he has to get someplace, he has to go to find the king in order to annul some decree. So how's he going to get there? The river is frozen. So they take this tub, a rub-a-dub-dub, 3 men in a tub, Reb Shmelke and his assistant. They get into this areva. What's it called in English? A trough. It's like a washing basin or something. And they stand in this tub on this frozen, this ice-filled river. They say, "Mush, go," and they like zoom along in this magic tub to get to the king. And when the king sees this miracle, he's of course says, "Oh, holy rabbi, I guess we better, annul the decree and not beat up on the Jews." So the Hasidim say, "Oh, where can you find a tub like that today? Where do I get me one of them tubs?" Rabbi Alter, the teacher, says, "What do you think of that story?" "Oh," said Rabbi Alter, the slaughterer, "where shall we find such a trough today?" They aside and said, "We're traveling in a big ship. We're traveling in a big ship. Not to the king of flesh and blood, but the king, the Melech Malchei Amlochim, to God. And we see no oath l'tovah. We see no sign for anything getting any better." Then Cyril said, "That's just what I was about to say. Here we are on our way to the land of Israel, and not as much as the smell of a miracle." Right? All these fantasy stories about flying carpets and magic tubs and etc. And here we are. We had this storm at sea, and we're on our way to Eretz Yisrael. And don't you think we could get a little miracle? So they're so rooted in the realistic world. They said, we could use a miracle, but of course we have no miracles. Those of us in the realistic world. Right, precisely. They just survived the storm, and they don't see any miracle. Because when you live rooted in the naturalistic world, so you see, this is this and that was that. But what kind of miracle do they want? They want a miracle. Presto chango. They had miracles all around them, and they don't see it. They were on page 100. They hear the ship is approaching the port. They promptly forgot all the toil of the journey and difficulties of living on board the ship. They're about to get to Eretz Yisrael. So what do? They put on their Shabbos clothing, and they're ready to get off the boat to Eretz Yisrael. Rabbi Moshe had a little bag around his neck which had Afar Eretz Yisrael, the dirt of the Holy Land. That was a custom that Jews in diaspora, they would somehow get this little bag of Holy Land, which, God forbid, they didn't make it, and they had to be buried. They'd be buried with like a little drop of the earth of the Holy Land with them. So now they're approaching the shore. He doesn't need it anymore. What's he do? He sprinkles it out to the. Now he's in trouble. But it's kind of like the opposite. But he says it's not that I don't want it. It's that soon, and then he brings this midrashic idea. Soon, like in the days of the Messiah, the whole world will become Israel. All of Israel will become like Jerusalem, and all of the world will become like Israel. And I'm throwing the dirt to get a head start. But it kind of like reminds us, I don't think this is what Agnon was thinking, but it kind of reminds us, it's kind of like a mirror image of the old tale about the Jews throwing their tefillin overboard as they got to Ellis Island. We won't need that anymore, right? Those, whether that actually happened or not, there was such an urban legend, that if you could drain New York Harbor, you'd find all the tefillin that were thrown overboard as the Jews reached shore. But when it came time to get there, it was not yet time. Because what happened? The storm had turned them around, and they're back in Istanbul. Now this is an element in the tales of the Baal Shem Tov. The Baal Shem Tov made an attempt, unlike Rabbi Nachman, who actually got to Eretz Israel. The Baal Shem Tov, Rabbi Nachman, her grandfather, the Baal Shem Tov, here he is. Here's the Baal Shem Tov. I don't know if we know that this is actually the Baal Shem Tov, although that is actually the Baal Shem Tov's actual signature, which we have from some census record that the Jews in the town had to sign. Rabbi Yisrael ben Eliezer, the Baal Shem Tov, the master of the holy name, the founder of Hasidut. The Baal Shem Tov, according to the story, made an attempt to come on Aliya with his and the assistant and his daughter, Ador. They get to Constantinople. They, according to one version, they have the same kind of thing. The boat goes out and the storm sends it back. They have to go back. According to another version, they miss the boat. So either like that, either like the Nobel, more like Ananya. The Baal Shem Tov says, "Oh, I could take my hanky and spread it out on the sea, and me and three of us, we could sit on it and go. Except I'm a little concerned because if while we're going, we should lose the kind of special intent, the kavanah, the kind of like being plugged into the divine on a mental level, will we think? And I wouldn't want you guys to drown. So maybe it's better we should just go back." So this element, all of these elements of the story exist in the Hasidic folktale. Agnon is now reworking into our story. So they go back and they realize that they're back in Constantinople, right where they started. They wonder, maybe it's a sign. Maybe we should go back to Buczacz. They know. Alo na'aleh, here on page 101. We shall go up at once. Alo na'aleh. Who said alo na'aleh? Who said that? Who in the Torah? Kalev. After the Miraglim, after the spies, Yehoshua and Kalev, the other spies said, "No, we can't make it. We'll never be able to conquer the land." Kalev says, "Alon na'aleh, we'll go. We'll be able to get it." So they lightning doesn't strike twice. They take the ship again. They go quietly 5 days and nights, and they arrive safely near Yaffo. And they get to Yaffo. There's this description of getting off the boat in Yaffo, which is actually probably very much how it was. Yaffo, the boat can't come into. Boats have to dock offshore. The I don't know what it's called, the bay or the ocean wall in Yaffo is not deep, so a boat can't come right up to the port. They have to weigh anchor off, and then these little boats would come out and take the people and their luggage and ferry them back and forth. It was apparently a very unpleasant experience. These Arab kids would come out, and Agnon described this as when he got off the boat as an Ole in 1907. And then Yitzchak Kummer in Kol Shel Sholem just yesterday, there's also a description there. It's extended and comedic version of what that whole episode was like. They get there, they're constantly remembering their lost comrade Hanania, and now the narrator tells us on page 106, it's now sitting to find out what happened to Hanania. When his comrades went to in Constantinople when they went to when they went no in on the Black Sea when they went to fetch victuals, when they had to get food, journeyed. He went along with them, but on the way he parted from them and went in a different direction. But they didn't notice it. And what happened? Well, a certain Gentile came along. Hanani says, "Oh, I know you. Aren't you the guy that offered to show me the shortcut through the cave to get up to the Holy Land?" And he was unsure if that was the proper way to go. Not that it wouldn't get him there, but he thought it might not be seemly that should be the path to Eretz Yisrael. Because I asked, "What are you doing here?" So, long story short, he finds an eyewitness that can connect Zusha, the Aguna's husband, with the dead guy. Somebody that can testify that her husband, the long-lost husband, is actually dead. She sees him and sees the tefillin, because this is the Gentile, the non-Jew, still putting on the tefillin because he thinks it's the costume of the robber chief. And thus, Hananiah is able to free the Aguna. And because of that, because he was busy with his knotted kerchief, right? He had something to do. He had a task that needed tikkun, that needed repair. Something had to be fixed in the world. So that he missed the boat. Now, the Aguna here is an Aguna. The woman whose wife is lost. The husband is lost. But maybe it's also a metaphor for, or a symbol of what? In a story about the return of the Jewish people to their national homeland, what meaning might an Aguna have? In a story where we talk explicitly about the return of the Shekhinah, of the divine presence to the Holy Land, the Jewish people, the entire Jewish people, in the metaphor, in the midrashic metaphor of God being the husband, the Jewish people being the bride, Shir HaShirim, which is going to play very prominently in another chapter, the Song of Songs. Right? So freeing an Aguna is not just about this Aguna, this one woman whose husband is separated from her. Remember the Agnonian idea of what an Aguna is. Not husband is lost, it's that his love is separated. These two, husband and wife, they can't get it together. They're returning to the Holy Land. The Shekhinah is hitching a ride on Hananiah's magic purchase. We have to free the Aguna before we leave. Before we shut out the light in Hutzlar, in the exile, we have to free the Jewish people. Now, not every single Jew, obviously, but the Aguna as maybe as a symbol for the Jewish people as we begin the return to the Holy Land. Now, I remind you, we're coming up on the end. Give me a few more minutes so we can just make a few more miles. I remind you, the story's set in the mid-19th century, but it's written, at least the version we have, in the 1930s. I posed you a question last time. Agnon is saying more about the 1930s than he is saying about the 1830s, and we need to know what that was. So Hananiah, seeing that he was in distress, that he'd missed the boat, they were on the bottom, page 109. Seeing that he'd missed the boat, raised his eyes to the sky and said, "Lord of the universe, I have nothing on which to depend except your many mercies." And then God gives him this idea that the kerchief can be spread out. There were these other ideas earlier. He mentions other ideas in midrashic literature, in Jewish literature, in other fables. There's this notion that that appears in medieval Jewish fables of that King Solomon had basically it's a page out of the Arabian Nights. that King Solomon had a magic carpet, that sometimes there's some stories where a bird will come and pick you up, but all these types of magic plot devices where in the story you have to get quickly from point A to point B, and the fable needs to have something that will do it, whether it's Shmelka's magic tub, or King Solomon's magic carpet, or Harry Potter's broom, or Alice's rabbit hole, but Hanania had his kerchief. Now, again, I remind you, and I suggest that you go back and take a look at it. Agnon had already written about a kerchief, about a magic kerchief. And that magic kerchief, it wasn't a magic kerchief. There was nothing magical about the kerchief in the story on this topic. But the kerchief itself is a symbol of redemption. Agnon used the idea in a number of places. There's a collection called Korot Beitenu, which is not translated. It appears as a section of another book, as well as one of the posthumous volumes in a larger format that his daughter published after he died. It's a kind of mythic family tale, the story of the Chachkis family, where he kind of goes, kind of like Roots, where it's based upon actual genealogy, and actually in the volume itself, in this Korot Beitenu, you have the Agnon's real family tree going back as far as he had it, but it's filled in with all this kind of back fable, and it's written as a kind of like Agnon, the author, relating the family history for his children. So there's this story about this forebear whose name was also Yosef, who had come on Aliya many generations before Agnon, where he says that some of our relatives tell the story that as this Rav Yosef was coming on Aliya, there was a storm, and the sea was angry. The ship was gonna sink. So our ancestor took a chuppah, not a kerchief, but he had a chuppah, a marriage canopy, which his forebears were sending along to Israel, and a miracle occurred, and the chuppah became like a sail. He's kind of like, what do you call that, windsurfing? Windsurfing? He's windsurfing on the Mediterranean with this chuppah. Type of until he was delivered safely to the dry land of Israel. The miracle wasn't that he sailed to Israel on this chuppah or on a kerchief. The miracle was that he left the diaspora. The miracle was that he flew El Al or continental. Otam Hadarot lo hayu regilim lalot Israel. Because in those days it wasn't so common for Jews to come on Aliyah. So you want a miracle? So maybe the miracle is that he got there. Maybe it was a miracle that he got there on a kerchief. But maybe it's a miracle that any of us get here at all. Vega and Cyril, they're on the boat. They're saying, "Oi, where do we get a kerchief like that? Where do we get a tub like that? Where's our magic broomstick?" And they don't realize that just getting here in any way, is a miracle. So, and of course, in our story, because Hanania goes and he's and he's not set back by the storm. He actually had gotten to Eretz Israel before the Bilvav Yamim, before any of the others. There's this lengthy description of the journey from Yaffo up to Jerusalem, which is probably actually quite accurate and probably a real description of how Jews traveled in those days. And of course, they go, when you come to Eretz Israel, where are you going to go? You're immediately going to go up to up to Jerusalem, which was not exactly the way things look today. The old city was still very much destroyed. It was still very, before it was destroyed, there were you have these buildings that were built. This is the plaza of the hotel of the Western Wall is here, but there were buildings that were built right up to the old city. The whole hotel itself was really not much more than an alley. There's a picture of it. This is what the hotel looked like, I think, in the 1860s, right? The whole thing was just this alley. We talked about this when we read Tzilah and the description there. It was that way until 67, right? And they go up to the Western Wall. There's a description of the Shir Hashirim, and they're able to fulfill the Shir Hashirim of Reb Moshe's brother from Hamidach. I mentioned to this other story, this other very important Agnon story, which has an echo here because one of the characters in that story, his brother, is one of our comrades. That brother dies while reciting Shir Hashirim in a kind of feat of ecstasy, and here they're able to complete it. And it's as if we've redeemed Shir Hashirim, we've redeemed that verse and brought it with us to Eretz Yisrael. Shabbat comes, they go to shul, they each get an Aliya. All of a sudden, here on page 120, all of a sudden, they're in shul. All of a sudden a fine voice was heard, finer than all the voices there, and like the voice which we heard upon the sea. Our comrade looked up and saw Hananya before them. His face bright with joy and radiance as the waves to sea when the moon shines upon them. He was taller than he had been, and now he's wearing shoes upon his feet. He's taller not just because he's got lifts in his feet, but because he's regained his majesty. Right? The pride, the Jew returns to his homeland. He's no longer wandering here and there. And they ask him what happened, and he tells them about the kerchief, and they know that that's what they had seen on the street. Next week we'll pick up just with the last chapter. If you haven't read the whole thing, use the opportunity to do it. Let me pose to you a few questions, and we'll read the last chapter, and we will then really try to discuss some of the larger themes that are going on. But here's just a couple of questions. On the website, or by email, I'll send out to you, I'm going to put up links to various other Agnon stories. Where available, I have them up in English. You don't have to read all of them. You can sample some of them. I'm going to put up the first couple, chapter 2, and the last chapter 2 of Smol Shom, Agnon's magnum opus. I think it's about 600 pages. You're not going to read the whole thing for next week. I have it in English. I'll give you this in English. It's a story. It's a parallel story of Aliya, but one that takes place in the early 20th century. And despite the presence of a sentient talking dog, is a very, very, very realistic. It is such a realistic novel that the fact that one of the main characters is this, not a talking dog, but a sentient dog, meaning we, the reader, are privy to his thoughts, that doesn't interfere with the realism of the novel. But it's a tale of Aliya. It's a somewhat different, but in some ways very similar tale of Aliya. Completely not by coincidence, on page 115 in our story, there's this little Dvar Torah. That when they get to Jerusalem, they're learning with the Kabbalists and the mystics. And there's a little Dvar Torah which happens to be from this week's Parsha, Parsha Vayishlach. Coincidence? I don't know. Bereshit, Lamed Gimel 19. Genesis 33, verse 19. Talks about Yaakov coming back to Eretz Yisrael after he had been with Lavan, and he comes to Shechem, and he purchases a Chelkat Sadeh, a portion of a field. And he mentions, Agnon here mentions the Ibn Ezra's comment on the Chelkat Sadeh. That Chelkat Sadeh, that portion of the field, has a cameo appearance at the very end of this long novel, Tmol Shel Shom. Again, the Tmol Shel Shom is translated as just yesterday or only yesterday. Only yesterday. What's the connection? When Agnon puts in these kinds of connecting dots, you have to try to figure out what he's saying about from one thing to the other. If you've read Tmol Shel Shom only yesterday, well, you're in a better position. This whole question about the non-Jews, I made this point that the portrayal of the non-Jews is really quite sympathetic throughout. He didn't have to do that. He could have just left it out altogether. Or he could have been cynical or satirical or ironic, all of which he was capable of, about the non-Jews. But it's really quite very sympathetic portrait. All the non-Jews that we encounter in the story are all quite good. The sailors are nice, they help us out. Even the robbers are, you have thieves, non-Jewish thieves. They put on tefillin every day. I mean, what more could you want? And, right? They too, they're more like Robin Hood than actual thieves. Why does he make that point? The story again is written in the 1930s. During what's called the fifth Aliya. For historical purposes, we divide the waves of immigration of Jews during modern Zionism into different waves. Agnon himself came initially during the second Aliya, before World War I. But his story is written during the fifth Aliya. What was going on in the world in 1930s, early 1930s? How is what he's saying about Israel and Zionism and the return to the land, again, put in the form of a fable of pre-political Zionism? Political Zionism doesn't exist at the time that the Bilvav Yamim are coming, but it's a tale written during the heyday of political Zionism in the 1930s. What's going on in the world? What's going on with Aliya? A quick trip to Wikipedia just to search for the fifth Aliya, the fifth wave of Aliya will fill in plenty of background information if you need it, and that will help you think about what is he trying to say with this story. Finally, the Shmuel Yosef and Shalom Mordechai Alevi, the storyteller, the Mesaper Agadot, the fable weaver. What is he saying about himself? What is Agnon saying about himself? What is he saying about the occupation of being a Jewish novelist, a Jewish story writer during that period, during the early, middle parts of the 20th century? And how is that reflected through the story? I apologize, we went a little bit over, but I wanted to try to make our way through as much of the story as possible so that next week we can actually talk about it and the themes here and how it's reflected throughout his writing. So I welcome your comments and thoughts during the week, and we'll conclude next week. If you haven't read the whole story, you really ought to. So if you go to the website, afterwards, the archives, either you can participate live online, or afterwards, the next day you can get the archives. So on here, you have to register. It's free. You have to register, and with Wednesday, you have to register for this particular. You have to add this. Yeah, there's a button that says "Add this class." You have to log in with your username and password, and then, okay. If we don't have your email, if you'd like to get the sources by email, give me where's Ira? Oh, you fixed it? Okay, great. Let me just look at what the people are saying here by chat. I don't have a pen here. No, somebody else has. Not necessarily, because I'm not going to send the whole mailing list. I'll just send it to people over here. Oh, so Sherry asks why there are two characters named Alter. So that's just, I think that's just typical Agnonian, wit. That there's the old Alter is a Yiddish name which literally means old, like right. So in other words, well, the young people in Alter tend to get old. It happens to all of us. So Alter is a name which like Alter Kaker. Um, so Alter, so there's in the story there's old Alter and there's young Alter. Right. Yeah. Right. Uh-huh. So you, you can get the archives. Either you can participate live. So then afterwards, the next day you can get the archives. And this you have to register. It's free. You have to register, and then you can download the archives. If you have any trouble, just email us and we'll help you. So it'll be on the